The morning sun rose over the frontier colony of Elysium 7, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded the settlers of old Earth sunrises they had only seen in pictures. Myra Chen was 12 years old, and she loved everything about science, especially the strange purple soil of this new world that her family now called home. Her teacher had given the class a simple assignment: collect soil samples from different areas and write about what they found. Myra grabbed her small collection kit and told her mother she would be back before lunch. Her mother smiled and reminded her to stay away from the neutral zone near the border, and Myra promised she would be careful. The colony was still new, only 3 years old, built on a world that sat between human space and the territory of the Corvathi Dominion. The Corvathi were tall, insect-like beings with hard shells and many legs, and they had ruled their part of the galaxy for thousands of years. Before humans ever left Earth, there was peace between humans and the Corvathi, but it was an uneasy peace, built on careful words and strict boundaries. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez had worked for 2 years to create the treaty that allowed humans to settle on Elysium 7. She had made only one demand that she refused to negotiate: human civilians, especially children, must never be harmed. The Corvathi had agreed, though they found the demand strange. To them, children were simply smaller versions of adults, nothing special, nothing worth protecting more than anything else. Sethi did not understand that humans saw their children different. Limra walked through the fields outside the colony, her boots leaving small prints in the purple soil. She filled one container, then another, carefully labeling each one with the location and time. Work made her happy, and she wandered further than she meant to, following a trail of unusual rocks that sparkled in the sunlight. She did not notice when she crossed the invisible line that marked the edge of the neutral zone for Corvathi border. Soldiers watched her from their patrol vehicle. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Crix, studied the small human through his optical scanner. Saw a child alone, far from any protection, carrying nothing but a small bag. Crix had fought humans before in small skirmishes, and he hated them. He hated how they refused to show proper respect to older species. He hated how quickly they spread across the galaxy. Most of all, he hated how the High Council had ordered his people to treat them as equals. This child was an opportunity. Other species in the galaxy needed to see that humans could be touched, could be hurt, could be made to suffer, just like anyone else. Crix ordered his soldiers forward. Myra saw them coming and tried to run, but the Corvathi were faster. She screamed for help, but she was too far from the colony for anyone to harm. What happened next lasted for nearly an Earth. Corvathi soldiers recorded everything on their personal devices, laughing as they did things that no living being should ever do to another. They did not know about the small neural recorder implanted behind Myra's left ear. Human children received these devices at birth, a safety measure that parents hoped would never be needed. The recorder captured everything, every scream, every moment of terror, every cruel laugh from the soldiers who tortured a child for sport. When they were finished, they left her body in the purple soil and returned to their base, believing they had sent a powerful message. A merchant vessel found Myra 3 hours later. The captain, an old trader named Samuel Webb, had seen many terrible things in his long life among the stars, but when he found the broken body of that little girl, he fell to his knees and wept like a baby. Called for emergency medical help, knowing it was too late, and then he made another call. The neural recorder was still functioning, and Samuel knew what he had to do. Uploaded the contents to the emergency military channel that all human ships monitored within minutes. The recording reached the nearest military outpost within 11 minutes. It reached Earth halls of the United Terran Assembly, fell silent as the recording played. 700 representatives from every human nation and colony watched in horror as Myra Chen died again and again on their screen. Some turned away, unable to watch. Others forced themselves to see every moment, burning the images into their memory. When the recording ended, no one spoke for a full minute. And the speaker of the assembly, an old woman named Helena Cross, stood and spoke in a voice that shook with controlled regesh, called for an immediate vote on Protocol Prometheus, the emergency measure that had existed since humanity first ventured into space but had never been used. Protocol Prometheus meant total. Where it meant every human ship would become a weapon of. Where it meant every factory would build Weapons, it meant every able person would serve in some way. It meant humanity would fight as one until the enemy was completely and utterly defeated. Vote was unanimous for the first time in human history. Every representative agreed without a single voice of opposition. In 10 minutes after the vote, the orders went out to every human world, every ship, every outpost. 20 minutes after Mira Chen's death was confirmed, humanity declared war on the Corvathi Dominion. Ambassador Vasquez received the news on her ship. As she traveled to a diplomatic meeting, she read the declaration, saw the recording, and then she did something she had not done since she was a little girl. She sat alone in her quarters and cried until she had no tears left. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her uniform, and began planning. Corvathi had broken the one rule she had made them promise to keep. They had killed a human child and recorded it like entertainment. They thought this would make humanity afraid. They thought humans would see their weakness and back down. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Across the galaxy, humans stopped what they were doing. Fathers held their children closer. Mothers looked at their sons and daughters and imagined Mirald soldiers who had sworn never to fight again, called their former commanders and asked where they should report. Scientists abandoned peaceful research and began designing weapons. Workers demanded that their factories switch to military production. A species that had spent centuries fighting among themselves suddenly remembered that they were all human first. Corvathi had made a mistake that would cost them everything they had touched. A human child, and now they would learn why that was the worst thing any species could ever do. Admiral Kazuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the UTS Vengeance. The largest warship humanity had ever built was 63 years old, and he had spent 40 years serving in the Terran Navy. He had seen battles, lost friends, and earned every scar on his weathered face, but he had never felt anything like the cold fury that filled him now around his flagship. 1,700 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and battleships stretched across the darkness of space like an angry swarm. This was the first expeditionary fleet, assembled in just 18 hours from ships stationed across human territory. More fleets were forming behind them, gathering strength for what was to come. A communication officer turned to the admiral with a worried expression. The Corvathi High Council was demanding to speak with whoever commanded the human fleet. They wanted explanations. They wanted to negotiate. Admiral Tanaka nodded slowly and ordered the channel open. At the face of High Counselor Vex appeared on the main screen, his insectoid features arranged in what the translators interpreted as diplomatic concern. Vex spoke first, his voice clicking and buzzing through the translation software. He reminded the admiral that the Corvathi Dominion and the United Terran Assembly had a treaty of peace. Pointed out that any military action would be a violation of galactic law. He mentioned that the Corvathi controlled 900 worlds with billions of soldiers and thousands of warships. Suggested that whatever misunderstanding had occurred could be resolved through proper channels. Admiral Tanaka listened without expression until the counselor finished speaking. Then he leaned forward slightly and spoke in a voice that carried no emotion, no heat, only the promise of absolute destruction. Said for simple sentences that would be remembered for Centaurus. You recorded it, you made her suffer, you laughed, heard everything. Then he cut the communication channel and ordered all ships to maintain radio silence. There would be no more talking. The Corvathi High Council stared at their screens in confusion. They had expected threats, demands, perhaps an ultimatum that they could negotiate. They had experience with other species who made loud noises before accepting compromise, but the humans had simply gone silent. The channel was dead. Attempts to re-establish communication failed. Human fleet sat at the edge of Corvathi space like a coiled snake, waiting back on Earth and across every human world. Something remarkable was happening. News of Mira Chen's death had spread to every corner of human civilization within hours. The recording was not released to the public, but people knew what had happened. A little girl had been killed by aliens who thought humans were weakened. Now, humanity was going to world divisions that had lasted for centuries. Suddenly seemed meaningless. Nations that had been rivals for generations put aside their differences. Political parties that had fought bitterly over every issue found themselves in complete agreement. Religious leaders of every faith called for their followers to support the war effort. Corporate executives converted their factories without waiting for government orders. Transformation happened so fast that even human historians would later struggle to explain it. Within 3 days, every major human factory was producing military equipment. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels now assembled warships. Around-the-clock mining colonies increased their output by 300%. Research facilities shifted their focus to weapons development. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers, not because anyone forced them to come, but because they wanted to serve. Retired soldiers in their 60s and 70s demanded to be given something useful to do. Teenagers lied about their age to join, though the military turned most of them away. Mothers and fathers who had never held a weapon asked for training so they could protect their homes if the war came to them. The Galactic Council watched these developments with growing unease. They had seen wars before, thousands of them throughout their long history. Wars over territory, resources, trade routes, and political power, but they had never seen anything like this. Most species fought because they had to, or because their leaders ordered them to. Humans seemed to fight because they wanted to, because something deep inside them demanded revenge. The Velthri ambassador sent a message to his government describing what he observed. Wrote that the humans were not preparing for a war. They were preparing for an extermination. Recommended that all Velthri ships stay far away from the conflict zone. Other species reached similar conclusions and began quietly withdrawing their presence from anywhere near Korvathi Spacheno. One wanted to be caught between humanity and their targeton, the Bridge of the Vengeance. Admiral Tanaka reviewed the battle plans with his senior officer's strategy was simple. Because the goal was simple, they would not fight for territory or resources. They would not try to capture enemy ships or take prisoners. They would destroy everything that represented Korvathi military power, and they would do it so completely that no one would ever forget. This tactical officer, a young woman named Commander Sarah Park, asked if they should prepare for negotiations in case the Korvathi offered to surrender the soldiers responsible for Mira's death. Admiral shook his head slowly. Surrender was not an option. He would accept. Korvathi had taught humanity a lesson about what they were willing to do to human children. Now humanity would teach the Korvathi a lesson about what happened to anyone who touched their young. Commander Park nodded in understanding and returned to her station. She had watched the recording like everyone else. She had 2 children of her own back on Earth, a boy and a girl. Close to Mira's Ajash would have flown her ship into the heart of the Korvathi homeworld herself if the admiral ordered it. Every human in the fleet felt the same way. They were not soldiers fighting because orders told them to. They were parents, siblings, aunts, and uncles. They were humans who understood in their bones that a child had been tortured to death, and they would make the galaxy understand why that was unacceptable. The Korvathi Dominion continued to send diplomatic messages that went unanswered. They offered compensation, formal apologies, even the lives of the soldiers involved. Their messages grew more desperate as the days passed, and the human fleet remained silent. Counselor Vex could not understand what the humans wanted. In his experience, every species wanted something, and everything could be negotiated. It did not realize that some things could never be forgiven. Some acts could only be punished. The humans were not waiting for the right offer. They were waiting for the rest of their forces to arrive when the time was right. They would move forward and nothing in the galaxy would be able to stop them. The attack began without warning on a quiet morning. In the Korvathi border systems, 14 military stations guarded the edge of Dominion space, each one armed with enough weapons to destroy a small fleet. Korvathi commanders had been told to expect negotiators, diplomats, perhaps a show of force followed by demands. Instead, they received death. Human ships emerged from hyperspace already firing, their weapons tearing through shields and armor before the Korvathi could even sound alarms. The first station fell in 3 minutes, reduced to burning metal and floating bodies. The second lasted for minutes. By the time the 7th station sent out a distress call, the first 6 had already gone silent. Korvathi had prepared for a war of movement and strategy, the kind of conflict where both sides tested each other and looked for weaknesses. The humans did not care about strategy. They came forward in waves, accepting losses that would have made any other species retreat. pushing through defensive fire with a determination that seemed almost insane. A Corvathi gunner watched in disbelief as a human destroyer, its hull torn open and burning, continued to accelerate toward his stationed ship. Should have been dead. Its crew should have evacuated, but it kept coming, until it crashed directly into the station's shield generator. The explosion killed everyone on both sides, but it opened a hole that the next wave of human ships poured through. This was not how war was supposed to work. Commander Threx of the 4th Defense Fleet was a veteran of 30 years and over 50 battles, had fought against 6 different species, and had never lost a major engagement. When reports of the border stations reached him, he immediately organized his fleet for a counterattack. Expected the humans to pause after their initial assault to consolidate their gains and prepare defenses. Instead, they kept coming. Threx watched his tactical display as human ships pushed deeper into Corvathi territory without stopping. They ignored damaged vessels, left behind their wounded, and pressed forward as if nothing mattered except reaching the next target. This fleet met them above the colony world of Kresix, home to 2 million Corvathi civilians and a major military shipyard. The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most brutal in galactic history. Human marines landed on the military installations, while the space battle still raged above. They fought in ways that the Corvathi had never seen. Befaria, human soldier with half his armor blown away, continued fighting until blood loss finally took him. A squad of Marines charged a fortified bunker through open ground, losing 7 of their 10 members, but the 3 survivors reached the bunker and destroyed it from within. Medics treated wounded soldiers and then picked up weapons themselves. When the fighting came to Klossith, Corvathi soldiers were trained professionals who had never faced anything like this. They expected enemies who valued their own lives, who would retreat when the odds turned against them, who understood when a position was lost. Humans did not retreat. They did not surrender. They fought until they won or until they died. And even dying humans often found ways to take enemies with them. Commander Threx ordered a tactical withdrawal. After 6 hours of combat, had lost 40% of his fleet and nearly all of his ground forces. The shipyard was destroyed. The military installations were burning, and human ships were already moving toward the next system. As he retreated, Threx sent a report to High Command that would change how the Corvathi understood their enemy. Wrote that the humans were not trying to win in the traditional sense. They were not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. They were fighting to punish, to hurt, to make the Corvathi suffer as they believed the Corvathi had made them suffer. Every human soldier fought like they had personally known the child who did. They all carried her name written somewhere on their armor or their ships. They whispered it before battles and screamed it during charges. This was not a war. This was revenge on a scale that the galaxy had never seen. Reports spread through Corvathi military channels and then to the civilian government. The Counselor Vex read it 3 times, trying to understand what he was facing. Had offered everything he could think of: money, territory, formal apologies, the execution of the guilty soldiers, even changes to Corvathi law regarding treatment of aliens. Humans had not responded to any of it. They simply kept attacking, system after system, destroying everything military they found. Vex called an emergency meeting of the full High Council to discuss options. Some counselors argued for total mobilization, throwing every ship and soldier at the humans in one massive battle. Others suggested abandoning the outer systems and building a defensive line around the core worlds. A few quietly whispered that perhaps they should contact the Galactic Council and ask for intervention. But one old counselor named Threll, who had studied alien species for over 100 years, offered a different perspective. Said that the council was thinking about this wrong. They kept trying to understand the humans through Corvathi thinking, looking for rational goals and acceptable outcomes. But humans were not rational. Not about. Thistral had studied human history, their wars and their culture. Ash had noticed something that other species often missed. Humans had a concept they called family, and within that concept, children held a special place. To harm a human child was not simply a crime or an act of war. In human thinking, it was something worse, something that triggered responses that went beyond logic or self-preservation. Soldiers who killed that girl had not attacked. A random civilian had attacked something sacred to the entire human species, and now every human in the galaxy felt personally violated, personally wounded, personally driven to make things right. The council listened in silence. As Thrall finished his explanation, Vex asked the obvious question. What could they do to stop this? Thrall was quiet for a long moment before answering. Said that he did not know if anything could stop what was coming. Humans would keep fighting until they felt that justice had been served, and human ideas about justice were very different from Korvathi ideas. Korvathi believed in balance, in measured responses, in punishments that fit the crime. Humans believed in something called deterrence. They did not just want to punish the guilty, they wanted to make an example so terrible that no one would ever make the same mistake again. Destruction of the Korvathi military might not even be enough. Humans might not stop until the entire dominion was reduced to ashes, until the very name Korvathi became a warning to every species in the Galactic Council chamber fell silent. As the weight of those words settled over them for the first time, the leaders of a 900-world empire began to understand that they might not survive what was coming. The war ended not with a grand battle or a signed treaty, but with silence. The Korvathi dominion that had stood for 9,000 years simply stopped existing. As a unified power, human forces had systematically destroyed every military installation, every government building, every symbol of the authority that had allowed for soldiers to torture a child without fear of consequence. But they had not committed genocide. They had not massacred civilians. They had been surgical in their destruction, targeting only those who carried weapons or gave orders, leaving ordinary Korvathi to watch as their empire crumbled around them. The former dominion was divided into 117 smaller territories, each one placed under strict human oversight. Korvath military forces were disbanded permanently, their weapons collected and destroyed, their ships scrapped for metal. Former soldiers were given a choice: accept rehabilitation and monitoring, or face exile to worlds on the far edge of known space. Most chose rehabilitation. They had seen what human anger looked like, and they wanted no part of it ever again. Special operation to capture Mira Chen's killers took 3 days and cost the lives of 47 human marinists. For Korvathi, soldiers had barricaded themselves in an underground bunker with 200 elite guards, determined to die rather than face human justice. But the Marines did not stop. They pushed through every defense, lost friends in every corridor, and kept going until they reached the inner chamber where the first soldiers waited. Crix, the leader of the group, tried to kill himself when the Marines broke through the final door. A human medic stopped him, keeping him alive against his will so he could face trial. The other 3 soldiers were captured unharmed, though they fought desperately against their restraints. As they were dragged to the surface, the trial was held on Elysium 7, in a courtroom built on the exact spot where Mira Chen had been found. Representatives from every species in the galaxy were invited to watch. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds witnessed the proceedings through live broadcast. Evidence was overwhelming. Neural recording showed everything in perfect clarity. Every moment of cruelty, every laugh, every casual word spoken while a child screamed and begged for mercy. Defense attorneys assigned to the soldiers argued that they were following cultural norms, that they did not understand human values, that they thought the child was a military threat. Judges, a panel of 12 humans from different nations and backgrounds, listened to every argument with patience. And they delivered their verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentence was death, carried out immediately after the verdict was announced. 4 soldiers were executed in public view, their bodies vaporized so completely that nothing remained. Their names were erased from every record, every database, every historical document. They would not be remembered. They would not become martyrs. They would simply cease to exist, as if they had never lived. At Almira Chen's name, however, would never be forgotten. The United Terran Assembly passed the Elysium Doctrine, a formal statement of human policy that would be taught in every school and inscribed on every military vessel. The doctrine was simple: humanity protects its own, always, without exception, without proportion. Any species that harmed a human child would face the full weight of human civilization. There would be no negotiation, no measured response, no consideration of politics or economics. There would only be consequence. Admiral Tanaka retired from active service after the war ended. His mission coupled to his flagship, the UTS Vengeance, was not scrapped or re-signed. Instead, it was placed in permanent orbit around Elysium 7, its weapons still active, its systems maintained by a volunteer crew that would serve there for generations. The ship would stand guard over the colony forever, a silent reminder of what humanity was willing to do. Mira Chen's parents remained on Elysium 7, unable to leave the world where their daughter had lived. Indeed, the colony grew around them. New settlers arriving every year, children playing in the purple fields where Mira had once collected her soil. Samplesa Memorial was built at the center of the colony, a simple structure of white stone, with Mira's image carved into its surface. Beneath the image were words that had become humanity's promise to itself and its warning to the Galactic. Words read, "She was ours, and that is all the reason we will ever need the galaxy." Adjusted slowly to the new reality that humanity had created, trade resumed between human space and other species. Diplomatic relationships were rebuilt, science and commerce continued as they always had, but something fundamental had changed in how other species viewed the young civilization from the small blue planet called Earth. Velthry ambassador updated his assessment of humanity and shared it with his government. Wrote that humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, were not the oldest, the most advanced, or the most numerous, but they were the most dangerous. He explained that other species fought for rational reasons, territory, resources, power, survival. Humans fought for those things too, but they also fought for something else. They fought for each other. They fought for bonds that other species could barely understand. They fought with a fury that transcended logic or self-interest. Any species considering conflict with humanity should remember the Korvathi Dominion. 1,000 years of history, 900 worlds, billions of soldiers, and it all ended because for soldiers killed one child. The cost-benefit analysis was clear. There was no benefit worth that cost. Velthry ambassador recommended that his species maintain friendly relations with humanity forever. Other species reached similar conclusions. Korvathi became a cautionary tale, a story that parents told their children about what happened when you angered the wrong species. Humans became something new in the galactic community, not conquerors or tyrants, but protector species that faced threats from others, began seeking human allies. Similar civilizations that had once been bullied by larger neighbors found that a simple trade agreement with humanity provided better protection than any fleet. Humans asked for little in return, just respect, fair dealing, and one absolute rule: never harm human children. Never even think about it. Never forget what happened to those who did. Years passed, and then decades, and then centuries. War became history, then legend, then something close to myth, but the lesson remained fresh in the memory of every species that traveled among the stars. In the anniversary of Mira Chen's death, human ships across the galaxy would go silent for 1 minute. Crews would stop their work, bow their heads, and remember a little girl who loved science and collected soil samples. On a frontier world, they would remember what was done to her and what humanity did in response, and they would renew the promise that had defined their species ever since, to protect our own ways with it. Exception without proportion. Beckus, they are our sand. That is all the reason we will ever need. Story of Mira Chen and the war that followed spread beyond the known galaxy as humanity continued to expand. New species encountered human explorers and learned the history. Some were frightened by it, some were impressed, but all of them understood the message. In a galaxy full of ancient empires and powerful civilizations, there was one species that should never be provoked, not because they were the strongest, not because they were the smartest, but because they loved their children with a ferocity that made them willing to burn everything to ash. Humans called it love, galaxy called it terrifying, and no one ever made the same mistake again. 3 weeks had passed since the war began, and the Korvathi Dominion was bleeding. 62 worlds had fallen to human forces, their military installations reduced to rubble, their defense fleets destroyed or scattered. Humans moved through Korvathi space like a fire that could not be contained, burning everything military they touched while carefully avoiding civilian targets. It was this last detail that confused the Galactic Council when they finally demanded Answer Ambassador Yellen Vasquez arrived at the council chamber on the neutral station of Harmony Prime, walking past representatives of 47 species who watched her with a mixture of fear and fascination. She wore her diplomatic uniform, but everyone knew she was not there to negotiate. The council chamber was ancient, built thousands of years ago by species that had long since faded into history. Its walls displayed the symbols of every member species, a reminder that the galaxy had rules that all were expected to follow. The chief counselor, a Velthari elder named Serix, called the session to order and immediately demanded that humanity cease all military operations against the Korvathi Dominion. Cited 14 different sections of galactic law, treaties that humanity had signed, and protocols that governed conflicts between species. Reminded Ambassador Vasquez that the Korvathi had offered full compensation and justice for the individuals responsible. He asked, with growing frustration, what more the humans could possibly want. Vasquez listened to everything without expression, her hands folded calmly in front of her. When Serix finished speaking, she rose slowly from her seat and looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. She asked a simple question: where was the council when Mira Chen was being killed? The chamber fell silent. Vasquez continued, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Pointed out that the council had rules about protecting civilians, noted that the council had mechanisms for responding to atrocities, mentioned that the Korvathi had broadcast the recording of Mira's death to several other species before humans even knew what had happened. They had shown it as a demonstration of strength, as proof that humans could be hurt without consequence, and the council had done nothing. No emergency session, no condemnation, no sanctions, nothing at all until human ships started destroying Korvathi military targets. No, suddenly, the council cared about rules and protocols and proper procedures. Serix tried to interrupt, but Vasquez raised her hand and kept speaking. She said that humanity had learned an important lesson from this experience. They had learned that the galactic community would not protect human children. They had learned that rules only applied when the powerful chose to enforce them, and they had learned that the only way to keep their people safe was to make the cost of harming them so high that no one would ever dare try again. The Velthari delegate, a younger member of Serix's species, stood and argued that the punishment was disproportionate. A child had died, he said, tragic as that was, and in response humanity was dismantling an empire that had existed for millennia. There had to be some sense of proportion, some limit to what was acceptable. Vasquez turned to face him directly, and something in her eyes made him step back involuntarily. She asked him if he had children. The delegate stammered that his personal situation was not relevant to the discussion. Vasquez smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. She said that to the Korvathi, Mira was one child among trillions, a statistical insignificance, a small price to pay for sending a message but to humanity. She was their child, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but really and truly. Every human who had ever lived was once a child, protected by parents and communities who would do anything to keep them safe. When the Korvathi tortured Mira Chen, they did not attack one family or one colony. They attacked the fundamental bond that held human civilization together. They attacked the promise that every human made to every human child: you are safe, you are loved, and anyone who hurts you will face consequence. Delegate tried to argue that this was emotional reasoning, not logical. Police Vasquez agreed with him. Said that humanity was not a logical species, not when it came to their children. Said that other species might calculate costs and benefits, might accept losses as part of doing business in a dangerous galaxy. Humans could not do that. They were not built that way. Evolution had wired them to protect their young with irrational ferocity, and no amount of civilization had changed that basic truth. She paused and looked around the chamber one more time before delivering her final message. She said that this was not a war in the traditional sense. This was a lesson, and class was still in session. She sat down, and the chamber erupted into chaotic discussion. Some delegates demanded that the council take action against humanity. Others argued that interference would only make things worse. A few quietly admitted that they understood why the humans were doing what they were doing. Even if they could not say so publicly, Chief Counselor Sarix eventually restored order and called for a vote on a resolution condemning human military action. The vote failed. 31 species abstained. Unwilling to take a position, 12 species voted against the resolution, including 3 who had lost children to Korvathi aggression. In past conflicts, only 4 species voted in favor, and 3 of those were close allies of the Korvathi. Council session ended without any official action, and Vasquez returned to her ship, knowing that the galaxy had made its choice. They would not help the Korvathi. They would not try to stop the humans. They would watch and wait and remember what happened to species who harmed human children. As her ship left Harmony Prime, Vasquez received a message from Admiral Tanaka. Human intelligence had located the 4 soldiers who killed Mira Chenthi were hiding in a military bunker on a moon in the Korvathi core systems, protected by an elite guard unit. Admiral was requesting permission to launch a special operation to capture them alive so they could face public trial. Vasquez approved the request without hesitation. Justice was coming for the ones who started this, and when it arrived, the whole galaxy would be watching.